You want to give me a gift? Okay, disappear from my life, my daughter yelled at me in front of everyone. So I did, I disappeared. And what happened next? Ruined her forever. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching my story from, so I can see just how far it has reached. My name is Gloria Thompson. I'm a 65-year-old black woman from Jacksonville, Florida, and until last month I believed there was nothing I wouldn't do for my only child. I taught math for 40 years, stacked my retirement penny by penny, and when Lauren wanted a bigger life, I paid the tolls and opened the gates. On the morning her face shattered the last good thing I thought we had, I was standing on the doorstep of her bayfront home in Coconut Grove, balancing a vanilla almond cake with dark chocolate ganache in both trembling hands. Wearing a new turquoise dress I'd bought on sale, tags snipped with the careful thrill of a woman who saves receipts. It was Lauren's 43rd birthday. I had ordered the cake from a French bakery in Coral Gables and tucked a small silver box in my purse. My mother's pearl necklace, 3 generations of women strung together. Lauren opened the door like a hostess running late for an event she didn't want. Her eyes flicked over me and slid back to the phone in her hand. "Oh, it's you," she said, stepping aside as if I were a delivery. No hug. No kiss. The greeting bounced off the marble foyer and fell flat at my feet. "Happy birthday, baby," I said, fixing my smile in place. "I brought your favorite. And something special." She exhaled, an exasperated little sound. "Put it in the kitchen, please. I'm on a call." The house was a cathedral of expensive surfaces I knew too well. Calicut counters I'd written a check for, a Sub-Zero that had cost more than my first car, a view of Biscayne Bay I had helped her afford. 5 years earlier, when she and her third husband Marcus invested in a 3-story modern box with an infinity pool, I'd provided the $120,000 down payment. "Just to get us over the hump, Mom," she'd said, glittering with gratitude that day. I had also co-signed the mortgage, because apparently my faith was stronger than my sense. Through the kitchen's glass doors, I could see my 11-year-old twin grandsons, their hair slicked to their heads, their laughter lost in the blue, splashing with a swim coach. They didn't notice me. The cake felt heavy, the pearl box heavier. I set both down and listened to the silence between my heartbeats. 15 minutes later Lauren strolled in. She was immaculate. Smooth hair in a sleek low bun, nude lipstick, nails the color of money. The small med spa she ran in Brickell, Azure Aesthetics, had taught her to polish herself down to a shine. It had also taught me the cost of an entrepreneur's dream. 8 years ago I'd floated her a $75,000 bridge loan, securing it with my townhouse, then quietly paying the line of credit myself when she needed a little more runway. I had never seen a runway that long. "So," she said, opening a glass bottle of sparkling water, "are you just dropping the cake or are you staying?" The cold in her voice had an edge I felt in my chest. "I hoped we could spend some time." "It's been almost 2 months," I said. "Maybe we could have an early dinner." I actually have plans later. Marcus is taking me to Mare Vista. Her mouth tilted, the same smile she'd used at 16 when she asked for the car keys. Mare Vista was the kind of waterfront restaurant that charged extra for air. Marcus, whose income came from investments that never seemed to have names, had asked me for $12,000 3 weeks earlier for an import opportunity that couldn't wait. I had peeled it out of the envelope I kept for medical what-ifs. "Tomorrow then?" I tried, my voice catching. "Maybe lunch." Lauren looked up from her phone and finally met my eyes. Her face was tight, controlled, about to say something she'd rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, pointing to the island stools. "Sit." I sat. The turquoise fabric pulled across my knees. "I've been thinking," she began, turning the water bottle between her fingers. "About my birthday, about what I want, about happiness." Her lashes fluttered. "And about your role." "Tell me what you need," I said, trying to sound generous instead of afraid. She placed the bottle down with a soft click and looked at me with a cool assessment that made me feel like a stranger trespassing in my child's life. "What I really want, the best gift you could give me," she said, enunciating each word as if laying tiles, is to disappear from my life. Preferably for good. The room went airless. I heard the pop of a bubble in the pool, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and my own blood in my ears. What? I whispered. You heard me. Her voice didn't wobble. I'm tired of the calls, the drop-ins, the retro opinions. The neediness. I can't breathe around you. My hands shook. 65 years lived. 43 as her mother. In none of those years had I imagined this sentence would be for me. I am your mother, I managed, tears threatening. I gave you everything. Exactly, she snapped, rising in one smooth movement. You gave and gave until I can't tell where I end and your expectations begin. I need space. Freedom. A life that isn't about answering to you. I stared at the cake. 12 tiny bees made of marzipan perched on glossy ganache, candles still in the little cellophane bag, waiting to be lit for a child who had just asked me to extinguish myself. I only want to be part of your life, I said. You are all I have. And that's the problem, she said, folding her arms. Go fix your own life. Leave mine alone. Standing was like learning to walk again. I picked up my purse and the small silver box with the pearls. The cake could stay. Maybe the twins would taste sweetness where there was none between their mother and me. I can't believe this, I murmured. After all I've done. She laughed softly, meanly. You did it for you, Mom. You did it to feel needed. To control. I'm not a kid. I don't need you smothering me. I moved toward the front door. Each step added a decade to my bones. At the threshold I turned, hoping for the flicker of a gentler girl I used to know. All I saw was impatience, like I was a guest who had overstayed. Happy birthday, Lauren, I said, and closed the door behind me. She didn't see the match she'd struck in me the moment she said disappear. Not a flame to burn me down, but a light to show me the exit. Back at my 2-bedroom condo near the Miami River, a modest place I'd bought with the proceeds from selling the house my husband and I shared before he died 20 years ago, I dropped my purse on the carpet and sank into the old plaid sofa. It had held us both, the colicky baby I'd rocked at 3 a.m., the furious teenager I'd waited up for, the grown woman I'd prayed for. Preferably for good, rang against the walls. Pain became a weight on my chest, then a drumbeat driving me through the night. I pulled a plastic storage bin from the hall closet, files I had saved not out of suspicion but because math teachers keep ledger minds. I opened envelopes, unfolded wire confirmations, lined up sticky notes like lifeboats on the kitchen table. I wrote down dates and amounts and reasons. When Lauren was 5 and the pediatrician sent us to a specialist for her asthma, insurance wouldn't cover the steroid nebulizer. I had sold my gold wedding earrings and paid $1,200. At 16, she begged for a summer program at Columbia, life-changing mom. And I took out a $18,500 Parent Plus loan to make it happen. In college she changed majors 3 times, between tuition gaps, apartment deposits, textbooks and unexpected fees. I counted $62,400 with my name on it. I paid for a first wedding for 250 guests at the Biltmore, $38,000 gone in a night of crystal and roses. 2 years later I paid half the lawyer when it ended. Second wedding quieter, still $12,000 for non-negotiables. When her used Lexus gave up in August heat, I co-signed a newer SUV and caught 6 payments when Marcus's investment income hiccuped. Private school for the twins when public just isn't an option down here. I covered a $24,000 shortfall the year Azure Aesthetics needed a new laser. That laser, by the way, was $22,000 I never planned to spend. By dawn the number circled me like a storm, $348,900 over 4 decades, not counting the constant hundreds, the field trips, the babysitter cancellations, the just until Friday Venmo requests. Nearly $350,000 of a life I had quietly handed away. I stared at the sum until the sting in my eyes went dry. A clarity settled in, cool and unforgiving as a ledger's straight edge. At 6 a.m., I did something I had never done. I took my phone, scrolled to favorites, and blocked Lauren. Then I blocked Marcus. Then Lauren's office, the twins' school, the med spa manager's number that always rang when there's a little hiccup. Each press of block this caller felt like moving a brick from my chest to a wall I chose. Small. Necessary. I showered, put on my slate blue pantsuit, my good suit, worn usually for funerals and the one time I thought I'd be promoted before I retired, and slipped my flats into my tote. For the first time in years, my errands had nothing to do with Lauren's calendar. First stop, the bank. At Bay State Credit Union, where Lauren and I kept a joint emergency account I funded for her emergencies, the branch manager, a kind Puerto Rican gentleman who had called me Miss Thompson for 20 years, looked up from the screen. "Morning, Miss Thompson. How can we help you?" "I need to close a joint account," I said, and gave him the number from memory. The balance was $10,700. I transferred every dollar to my own savings and set a new password no one in my family knew. Next stop, Biscayne Mortgage Services. 5 years earlier, I had sat at a glossy table and lent my signature and credit score to a house I didn't live in. Now I requested copies of the promissory note, the mortgage, the cosigner addendum, every rider, every right. The loan officer, Ms. Patel, slid a stack across to me and explained what I already knew but had been too hopeful to say aloud. As a cosigner, if the primary borrowers fell behind, I was on the hook. But I also had standing. Standing to ask questions. Standing to demand compliance. Standing, if it came to it, to stop being used as a parachute for people who like to jump. When I walked back into the Miami heat, the air smelled different. Not sweeter exactly, just honest. I had spent decades mistaking sacrifice for love and rescue for relationship. My daughter had asked me to disappear. I heard her. And for the first time in my life, I decided that what would vanish would not be me, but the version of me she could spend. I left Biscayne Mortgage Services with copies of everything: note, addenda, payment history, even the email addresses for the default department tucked into a neat manila folder. It felt like collecting pieces of myself I'd left on other people's desks. Outside, Miami heat pressed against my suit like a hand urging me to move. I did. For the first time in years, my day wasn't a series of favors. It was a route. Next, I walked into Bay and Brickell Legal Center on Southeast 1st Avenue and asked for a consultation with an estate attorney. The receptionist glanced at my walk-in face and my walk-with-purpose posture and found someone. 20 minutes later, I sat across from a woman with salt-streaked curls and a firm, kind voice, Attorney Anita Delgado. "How can I help, Ms. Thompson?" "I'm changing my life," I said. "I need the papers to match." In an hour we updated my will, removed Lauren as healthcare proxy, appointed my cousin in Tallahassee instead, and drafted a letter terminating the supplemental insurance and just-in-case riders I'd been paying for my daughter's family. We added a durable power of attorney that lived with someone who loved me for me, not my signature. Anita didn't blink at my list. When I told her the sentence my daughter had given me as a birthday gift, she did close her eyes for 2 long seconds, the way some people pray. "We'll finalize these by tomorrow. I'll courier hard copies and send secure PDFs," she said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said, feeling the words gather. "I need to go somewhere I'm not useful." Anita smiled softly. "Then go." I left with a retainer receipt and a promise. By noon, my phone lit up. Lauren, 12 missed calls. Marcus, 3. Azure front desk, 1. I watched them shake in my hand and set the phone face down on the passenger seat of my Corolla. The screen flashed like a heartbeat under a sheet. On Miracle Mile in Coral Gables there's a storefront with a window full of glossy photographs. Cobblestones, balconies, people smiling with their arms out at the sea. Second ACT Voyages, the sign read, in a cheerful font that looked like it had never met a regret. I stepped inside. "Welcome," said a young woman in an emerald dress at a reception stand. Her name tag read Harper. "How can we make your next chapter great?" "I'm 65, I said. "I taught high school math for 4 decades. I want a furnished place in a European city for a month, maybe 2, while I figure out more. I like light. I like quiet. I like walking. I don't know anyone there. I'm not afraid of that. Barcelona, she said, eyes bright. You'll love the Gothic Quarter. We have a partner who places retirees in short-term apartments and connects you with doctors, language classes, community groups. We can do proof of funds letters, airport pickup, even a kitchen stocked for your first night. The last time anyone stocked a kitchen for me, Lauren was 6 and I was grading algebra quizzes on the couch. That sounds like exactly what I need, I said. We spent an hour building a life from scratch. A 1-bedroom on a 3rd floor with a little wrought iron balcony looking onto a plaza. Wednesday morning appointment with a local financial advisor who specialized in US retirees. A packet of information on health options and English-speaking clinics. A list of community groups, book clubs, walking tours, watercolor classes. Harper printed it all and slid it into a folder with a tiny paperclip shaped like an airplane. I gave her my credit card for the ticket, the deposit, and 2 weeks' costs up front. I confirmed a Monday departure, a dawn car to MIA, a name on a sign at arrivals, Gloria M. Thompson. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the Miami sun blinked against my new itinerary. My phone buzzed again. I let it. On the drive home, muscle memory tried to take me toward Coconut Grove. I turned the wheel away and went to my condo instead. In the kitchen, I lined up the documents as if they were ingredients for a recipe I should have learned ages ago. A single-page letter to Biscayne Mortgage Services requesting a formal review due to known instability in the borrower's income, an appointment with their loss mitigation team, an authorization to receive all notices directly. A cancellation form for the supplemental insurance plan I'd been paying that cloaked Lauren's family with benefits they mistook for air. A simple letter to the twins' private school business office. Effective immediately, my contributions end. Then I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me and wrote the letter that would change the temperature of every room it entered. Dear Lauren, I wrote. You asked for the gift of my disappearance. I am giving it to you. I did not accuse. I accounted. Dollar figures with dates. Decisions with context. Boundaries with signatures. I explained that I had instructed my attorney to remove her from decisions, close the joint account, and exercise my rights as co-signer since she and Marcus had confided they were a month behind and exposed. I included photocopies of everything so there would be no question that what was happening was not a tantrum, but a transition. The letter took 3 hours to shape. When it was done, I read it once aloud, my voice steady over words I had practiced in my head without ink for years. I placed it in a large white envelope with her name in my neat teacher's cursive. I set it beside my purse and stared at it like it might rise and walk itself out of the apartment. A soft knock startled me. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Evelyn Carter, holding a takeout cup carrier and wearing the kind of house dress older women in Florida have earned. Evelyn was 70, a retired church choir director with a laugh that shook the hallway. Gloria, I saw you come in with that look, she said, passing me a sweet tea. The look that says, I set down something heavy and it might be me. You all right? I told her, because sometimes survival requires witnesses. I told her about the cake and the pearls and the sentence that split me. I told her about the bank and the mortgage and second act voyages. I told her about the letter. Evelyn listened the way some people sing, fully. When I finished, she dabbed her eyes with the hem of her dress and said, Baby, I've seen a lot of women serve themselves last until there's nothing left to plate. I'm proud of you for fixing your own. What do you need from me? I need you to be my truth, I said. In 2 days, I want you to check on me and find my apartment empty and this letter on the table. I don't want drama. I want distance. You can tell Lauren what you saw. You can tell her I'm safe. But I don't want to talk to her until I want to talk to her. Evelyn nodded like she'd been waiting her whole life to be useful in a way that mattered. I can act concerned. I did 5 Christmas pageants and a passion play without losing my cue, she said, and the first real laugh of my day surprised me out loud. We worked the details like 2 women planning a potluck for courage. She would come Tuesday morning. She would use the spare key I slid across my table. She would call Lauren from my living room and say honestly that I wasn't answering and that a letter was here with her name on it. She would hang up when the shouting began. That evening I opened my mother's jewelry box, the small one with the satin lining that smelled faintly of powder, and held the pearl necklace against the light. My grandmother had worn it in Savannah. My mother had worn it to her first day as the only black office manager at a downtown bank. I had brought it to a door where it was not wanted. I returned it to its nest and closed the lid. Not every heirloom needs to be passed to the person you birthed. Sometimes an heirloom is a sentence you hand yourself: I can change the story. I slept without dreams. In the morning, I put on jeans and a white shirt that always made me feel crisp. I ate toast with peach jam and answered no calls. Around 10, the phone lit up again and again. Lauren, then Marcus, then Lauren's best friend Nadia, then unknown, the last refuge of persistent people. I let them all go to voicemail and let the voicemail stack like leaves I did not plan to rake. At noon, my email pinged with the secure documents from Attorney Delgado. I signed where blue tabs told me to and forwarded what needed forwarding. I scanned my letter to Lauren and saved it in a folder labeled Proof I Exist. Then I packed 2 suitcases, both blue. One with clothes that could be layered. One with shoes that could be walked. A Ziploc of medications and another of chargers. A thin stack of books, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, a dog-eared geometry text I used to love. Into the inner pocket, I slid a little spiral notebook and a black pen. I wanted to write the life that was about to belong to me. Late that afternoon, as sun slid between the high-rises, I walked down to the river and stood on the small boardwalk where the air smelled like salt and metal. I thought of the girl I had been at 22, the way I believed love meant standing in every storm someone you adored created. I thought of the woman I had been yesterday, knocking on a door with cake in my hands and hope in my mouth. I thought of the woman I was in that moment, a person who could choose where her feet would go next. When I came back upstairs, I taped a small note to the inside of my front door for Evelyn, right above the lock: "Thank you for being my witness." On the table, the envelope to Lauren waited like a period at the end of a long, unwieldy sentence. Sunday, at 6 a.m., a yellow cab would honk beneath my window. On Monday, a man named Miguel would hold a sign with my name at El Prat Airport. Between those 2 points stretched a single, straight line I had drawn with my own hand. That evening, my phone rang again. I watched the screen glow with my daughter's name and let it fade. Then I turned the phone off. The silence was not empty. It was mine. Sunday dawned pink over the Miami River, streaks of light slipping between condo towers like promises. My suitcases stood by the door, zipped and patient. I brewed one last pot of coffee in the dented Mr. Coffee I'd had since my teaching days, poured it into a travel mug, and sat in the quiet. The note for Evelyn was taped by the lock, the letter for Lauren lay centered on the table, my handwriting sharp with decision. At 6 a.m., the horn of a yellow cab echoed up from the street. I closed the door behind me without looking back. The driver, a young Cuban man with salsa low on the radio, heaved my suitcases into the trunk. "Airport, senora?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and those 3 letters carried a weight I hadn't known was mine to put down. The ride to Miami International felt shorter than it had any right to. I watched the skyline recede, the glass towers dissolving into the sun. My phone, powered off in my purse, felt like a stone at the bottom of a lake. No calls could reach me now. No requests, no accusations, no cries of need that were really cries of convenience. At the gate, I sat among strangers, my boarding pass folded into my palm. Around me, families fussed over snacks, business travelers scrolled furiously on laptops, a couple argued softly in Spanish. I sipped my coffee and thought, I am invisible here, and that feels like freedom. The flight to Barcelona lasted nearly 10 hours. I alternated between watching the clouds like endless waves and scribbling in the small spiral notebook I had packed. I wrote about the girl I'd been, fresh out of college, believing that love meant giving until you were empty. I wrote about the mother I became, juggling classes and tutoring to pay for braces, lessons, every door my daughter wanted opened. I wrote about the woman I was on that flight, 65, tired, terrified, but carrying her own name into a new country like a banner. When the plane descended into El Prat Airport, the land below unfolded in rust-colored rooftops, patches of green hills, and the gleam of the Mediterranean. My chest swelled. For the first time in decades, my arrival was for me. At arrivals, a tall man in a linen shirt held a sign, Gloria M. Thompson. He grinned when he spotted me. Senora Thompson? I'm Miguel, from Second Act Voyages. Welcome to Barcelona. His English was lightly accented, warm. He took my suitcases as if they were feathers and guided me to a small black car waiting outside. The September air was warm but not heavy, a relief after Florida's humidity. On the drive, Miguel pointed out landmarks, the spires of La Sagrada Familia in the distance, the Arc de Triomphe, palm-lined boulevards where scooters buzzed like bees. This city is full of stories, he said. You will add yours. The apartment they had arranged for me was in the Gothic Quarter, on the third floor of a centuries-old building with narrow stone stairs that smelled faintly of history and jasmine. The front door creaked, opening to a space small but luminous. Whitewashed walls, a balcony with iron railings, wooden beams above. From the window, I could see a plaza where children chased pigeons and old men played dominoes at cafe tables. Miguel set down the bags and handed me a folder. Everything you need: maps, recommended doctors, grocery stores, community groups. Your meeting with the financial advisor is Wednesday morning. Until then, rest, explore, breathe. After he left, I stood in the middle of the apartment and let silence seep into me. No one here knew me as a bank, a babysitter, a fixer. No one here called me Mom, with an edge of demand. I was just Gloria. I unpacked slowly, hanging clothes, setting books on the small shelf by the bed, placing my mother's jewelry box on the dresser. When I reached the spiral notebook, I left it on the table beside a bowl of oranges. It looked like a declaration. Here, I will write my life. That evening, I wandered the narrow streets, their cobblestones uneven under my flats. Buildings leaned toward each other like neighbors whispering secrets. Laundry fluttered from balconies, and the air carried the scent of bread, garlic, and salt from the sea. I slipped into a cafe on a corner, ordered a café con leche and churros, and ate slowly, watching people pass, tourists craning their necks, locals strolling arm in arm, children darting like sparrows. For once, I wasn't waiting for a call, wasn't calculating if my presence was welcome, wasn't measuring how much of myself I had left to give. I was just a woman with sugar on her fingers in a city that didn't ask for anything but her company. Back in the apartment, I sat on the balcony with a glass of red wine from the corner shop. The plaza below had quieted, only the murmur of conversation floated up. I opened the spiral notebook again. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote, Day 1. I am alive, and I am mine. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slanting through the shutters and church bells marking the hour. I stretched in a bed that held only me and felt a strange peace. I made tea in the small kitchenette, buttered bread, and ate at the table while pigeons cooed outside. Later, I walked to a market Miguel had marked on the map. Stalls overflowed with fruit I hadn't seen in years, figs glossy as jewels, melons fragrant as perfume, tomatoes bursting with ripeness. I bought a basket of each, along with bread still warm from the oven, a wedge of manchego, and a small jar of honey. The vendor, a woman with silver hair tucked under a scarf, slipped an extra fig into my bag with a wink. At the apartment, I sliced the fruit onto a plate and ate slowly, savoring the sweetness. I thought of all the times I had rushed meals between classes, eaten scraps while saving the best for Lauren, skipped lunch to afford another lesson or activity. This was different. This was nourishment meant for me. That afternoon, I wandered farther, stumbling upon the cathedral with its Gothic spires rising like prayers. Inside, the air was cool and hushed. I lit a small candle and whispered a name I had carried for too long, Lauren. Not as a plea, not as an offering, but as a release. On my way back, I passed a bookstore and ducked inside. Shelves crowded with Spanish and Catalan titles, but in the corner, a small English-language section. I bought a collection of Maya Angelou poems, her words a reminder of women who had walked before me, women who knew about caged birds and the price of freedom. That evening, as the sky darkened over the plaza, my phone buzzed where I had tucked it in a drawer. I pulled it out, heart quickening. 87 missed calls. 41 voicemails. Lauren. Marcus. Unknown numbers. I listened to none of them. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, "Absence is its own kind of presence. She will feel it." And for the first time in 4 decades, I turned off the phone and slept without fear of who might need me next. The following day, I joined a walking tour for newcomers, organized by Second Act Voyages. A dozen of us, mostly retirees from the US and Canada, followed a guide through winding alleys and hidden courtyards. I fell into step beside Luisa, a 76-year-old Italian woman with bright eyes. "What brought you here?" she asked in lightly accented English. "My daughter asked me to disappear," I said simply. Luisa didn't flinch. She nodded, her face soft. "Ah. Mine too, in her way. So, here we are. We chose ourselves." We smiled, 2 women in the middle of Barcelona, finally learning that love doesn't mean surrender. That night, sitting on my balcony, the city lights flickering like candles, I realized something. I hadn't thought of myself as a mother all day. Not once. I had been Gloria, a woman walking cobblestones, tasting figs, holding space in the world. And that was enough. On Wednesday morning, 2 days after my arrival in Barcelona, I dressed in a crisp white blouse and gray slacks and made my way through the winding streets toward the office of the financial advisor Miguel had arranged for me. The air carried the scent of strong coffee and baked bread, shopkeepers rolled up their shutters, and schoolchildren darted past with satchels bouncing on their backs. I felt oddly steady, as if my feet had already learned these cobblestones. The office was on a quiet street near Plaça de Catalunya, a modest suite with frosted glass doors. A receptionist ushered me into a room lined with bookshelves, where a gentleman in his 70s stood to greet me. He introduced himself as Senor Ferrer. His handshake was firm but warm, his suit simple yet impeccably pressed. "Senora Thompson," he said in careful English, "welcome. Miguel has told me a little about your situation. You are here to begin a new life, yes?" "Yes," I replied, my voice more confident than I expected. "For once, entirely mine." We spent 2 hours combing through my finances. I handed over the documentation I'd carried across the ocean: retirement accounts, social security statements, savings, and the transfer confirmation from the joint account I'd closed in Miami. Senor Ferrer asked careful questions, jotting notes with a fountain pen. When I told him about co-signing the mortgage and initiating a review, he raised his brows. "You are wise to protect yourself now," he said. "Too often parents carry their children's debts on their shoulders until the very end." I thought of Lauren's voice, preferably for good, and swallowed. I carried too much, too long. It ends here. He explained the residency options for retirees: a non-lucrative visa, proof of stable income, health coverage. With your pension and savings, you qualify comfortably. If you invest a portion here, even modestly, you can grow your future rather than watch it shrink. His words landed like balm. I wasn't just escaping, I was building. We agreed I would open a local account and invest conservatively in government bonds. When I signed the initial paperwork, a sense of solidity spread through me. For once, my signature was not saving someone else. It was anchoring me. As I left the office, Barcelona bustled around me. Tourists clicking cameras, buses sighing at stops, vendors hawking scarves. I paused in the sunlight, folded the documents into my purse, and whispered, "This is mine." That afternoon I returned to the Gothic Quarter and ducked into a cafe Evelyn would have loved. Mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, the smell of cinnamon. I ordered tea and pulled out my spiral notebook. The words came easily. For 43 years, my daughter's needs filled every corner. Now there is space. Space to write. Space to breathe. Space to begin. The next days unfolded with quiet discoveries. Thursday, I walked to the harbor and stood watching the water. Gulls swooped, children licked ice cream, old couples strolled hand in hand. I thought of my late husband, how he used to dream of traveling when we retired. His heart had failed him too early, leaving me to carry both dreams and burdens alone. Standing by the sea, I felt his presence, not heavy with grief but light, as if he were nudging me forward. Friday, I joined a small group tour of the markets. Our guide, a young Catalan woman with bright scarves, led us through aisles of olives, cheeses, and spices. I tasted manchego sharper than any back home, honey so floral it seemed to hold the echo of bees. A Canadian couple in the group asked what had brought me to Spain. I paused, then said simply, I needed to save my own life. They nodded, and for once I didn't feel judged. Saturday, I ventured into a bookstore again. There, among travel guides and novels, I found a slim English-language journal titled Second Bloom, Stories of Women Who Began Again. I bought it, tucked it into my bag, and spent the afternoon on my balcony devouring every page. Stories of women in their 60s and 70s who had left marriages, businesses, whole countries. Women who had decided that survival wasn't enough, that joy was still possible. With each story, my own felt less like an outlier and more like a chorus. That evening, as I sipped wine and watched the plaza below, my phone buzzed in the drawer. I opened it, tempted. 97 missed calls now. Dozens of texts. Curiosity got the better of me, and I scrolled the messages without opening the voicemails. Mom, call me back. This is serious. Where are you? This isn't funny. We need you for the twins' recital. Don't make this about you. The bank wants a meeting. Please help us fix this. The desperation grew with each line, but nowhere did I see apology. Nowhere did I read remorse for the words that had driven me away. Only panic at losing their safety net. I turned the phone off again, set it back in the drawer, and whispered to myself, not this time. Sunday morning, bells rang out across the city as I walked toward the cathedral. I slid into a pew and sat among strangers, letting the organ music wash over me. I didn't pray for reconciliation. I prayed for strength to continue, for courage to honor the decision I'd made. After the service, outside the cathedral, I bumped into Luisa, the Italian woman I'd met on the walking tour. She was sipping coffee at a stand. Gloria, she called. Sit with me. We talked for an hour, sharing fragments of our stories. Her son had once told her she was useful only when paying bills. She had cried, then left Italy for Spain. I thought I was weak, she admitted. But leaving was the strongest thing I ever did. I nodded. I thought sacrifice was love. Turns out, it was a slow erasure. Luisa smiled sadly. Now you write yourself back. That night, I began drafting something more than diary entries. A letter, but not to Lauren. To women like me. I wrote about the years of bending, the exhaustion of being a well that never refilled, the cruelty of hearing your child wish you gone. I wrote about the courage of saying enough. By midnight, I had 10 pages. It wasn't polished, but it was real. On Monday morning, as light filtered into the apartment, I sat with my coffee and reread the pages. They didn't sound like a victim's lament. They sounded like a beginning. I decided then I would submit them to a blog or magazine, somewhere they might reach women sitting at kitchen tables in silence, wondering if they too could walk away. That same morning, a knock at the door startled me. It was Miguel, holding a stack of envelopes. Mail forwarded from the agency, he explained. Among them was one from Biscayne Mortgage Services. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, a letter confirming receipt of my request for review. They acknowledged missed payments, confirmed my rights as cosigner, and scheduled a conference call for the following week. Reading those words, I felt no fear. Only clarity. The tide had shifted. For once, I wasn't bracing for collapse. I was steering. That evening, I sat on the balcony with Maya Angelou's poems in my lap, the city glowing below, and realized something. Every day since I'd arrived, I had done something entirely for myself. It was the simplest revelation, yet the most radical. And I promised myself, I will keep choosing me, day after day, until it feels as natural as breathing. The week after I received the letter from Biscayne Mortgage Services passed like a slow unraveling of the old life I had carried. Each morning I woke to the bells of the Gothic Quarter, brewed coffee in the tiny stovetop pot the apartment provided, and sat by the balcony to watch the plaza stir awake. Children chased pigeons, shopkeepers lifted shutters, and street musicians tested their strings. Every sound felt like proof that the world was wide, that I had space to exist without being defined by anyone's demands. On Tuesday, I took the metro to Park Güell, climbing the mosaic steps beneath Gaudí's dragon fountain. The colors were wild, untamed, alive. I sat on a bench that curved like a wave and thought, this is what freedom looks like. Messy, brilliant, unnecessary to justify. I wrote in my notebook, I am building a life out of pieces no one thought I would keep for myself. By Wednesday, the conference call with Biscayne Mortgage was scheduled. I borrowed Miguel's office at Second Act Voyages for privacy, sitting at a desk with a headset that made me feel like a woman in charge of her own ship. Mrs. Thompson, said a voice from Miami, we're confirming that the borrowers, Marcus and Lauren Patterson, have fallen 2 months behind on payments. As co-signer, you are within your rights to initiate protective measures. My stomach knotted, but my voice was steady. I understand. I'd like to proceed with formal review. Please send me all future correspondence directly. The call ended quickly, businesslike. I removed the headset and sat still, the silence loud in my ears. I wasn't just blocking numbers now. I was redrawing borders. That afternoon, I received a flurry of emails. Lauren's name in bold, subject lines frantic. Call me now. Urgent. Bank meeting. Another, how could you do this? You're ruining everything. I didn't answer. Instead, I tucked the laptop away and walked down to the harbor, where the late sun gilded the water. Boats rocked gently, and the air smelled of salt. I whispered aloud, I'm not your anchor anymore. By Friday, Evelyn had emailed me from Miami. The subject line read, Update. She wrote, Lauren came to my door 2 days ago, crying, asking if I knew where you were. I told her I found your apartment empty and your letter. She read it, and for the first time I saw shock on her face. She said you must be bluffing. I told her no, this time you meant it. Be safe, Gloria. I'm proud of you. I closed my laptop with trembling hands. For decades, Evelyn had watched me give and give. Now she was watching me reclaim. That weekend, I joined Louisa again. She invited me to a support group she attended. Women from different countries, all older, all carrying scars from families who had mistaken them for endless resources. We met in a community center off Los Romblos, in a bright room with folding chairs and tea urns. There were 12 of us that day, a German woman whose son hadn't spoken to her in 3 years except to request money for his startup, a British widow who had raised 3 grandchildren while her daughter disappeared into addiction, a South African woman who sold her house to fund her son's film projects that never materialized. We sat in a circle and shared. When it was my turn, my throat tightened. My daughter told me the best gift I could give her for her birthday was to disappear from her life. So I did. Gasps, then silence. A woman from Ireland reached for my hand. That kind of cruelty is a knife. But look, you are still here. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my tone. For the first time, I am here. When the session ended, we lingered over tea. Louisa leaned close. This group saved me. It will save you too. We remind each other we're not disposable. That night, back in my apartment, I spread my notebook pages on the table. The beginnings of an essay, maybe even a book, stared back at me. I gathered them into order, edited a little, and typed them into my laptop. Then I searched for platforms that published women's stories. One called Voices After 50 caught my eye. Their tagline read, Because your second act deserves a spotlight. I sent my draft with shaking hands. The subject line, When a mother's gift is disappearance. By Monday, I had a reply. Dear Gloria, your story is powerful and necessary. We would be honored to publish it. Could we also record an interview for our channel? I read the words 3 times, my heart racing. My life, once reduced to the margins of someone else's script, was now being asked to stand at the center of a stage. Meanwhile, the messages from Lauren grew sharper. Evelyn forwarded me one she had accidentally overheard when Lauren was on speaker with a friend. She's lost it. She's being selfish, ruining our lives. If she thinks she can take the house, she's insane. Selfish. The word struck like a slap. After 43 years of sacrifice, I was selfish for saving myself. That evening, I lit a candle on my balcony, opened Maya Angelou's poems, and whispered the lines of courage into the dusk. Selfish or not, I was still here. By Wednesday, the Voices After 50 interview was recorded. A young woman named Clara set up cameras in my apartment. I wore my slate blue suit, the one I had carried across the ocean like armor. Why did you leave? Clara asked. Because love without respect is not love, I said, looking straight into the lens. Because I realized I had been financing my own erasure. Because my daughter told me to disappear, and I realized she was right. I needed to vanish from the role she cast me in, so I could reappear as myself. When the interview went live, the response shocked me. Comments poured in, women from all over the world saying they recognized themselves in my words, that they too had been told they were too much, too needy, too present. That they too had given until they had nothing left. One comment read, I'm 60 and my daughter only calls when she wants money for vacations. I thought I was alone. Thank you for reminding me I'm not. Another, your courage has given me permission to set boundaries with my son. He called me selfish. I call it survival. I read them all, tears sliding down my cheeks. My pain was no longer just mine. It had become a mirror for others. But with the light came the shadow. 2 days later, an email arrived from a lawyer in Miami representing Lauren and Marcus. They claimed I was mentally unfit when I signed recent documents and were considering legal action to void my changes. The words blurred on the screen. For a moment, fear clawed at my chest. But then I remembered the clarity of that bank call, the firmness of my hand as I signed, the steadiness of my interview voice. I was not unfit. I was finally awake. I called Attorney Delgado in Barcelona. She listened carefully and said, this is intimidation. We'll prepare. If they want a fight, they'll find you armed with truth. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the plaza. The air buzzed with laughter and music. I sat on a stone bench, watching young people dance to a guitarist's rhythm. A little girl twirled, arms wide, her joy spilling over. I wrote in my notebook, they may try to drag me back. But I have walked too far to return. This is not selfish. This is sacred. And under the Barcelona sky, with strangers' music filling the air, I promised myself, I will never hand my life back to someone who wishes me gone. The letter from Lauren's attorney sat on my kitchen table like a snake coiled and waiting. The words, mentally unfit, coercion, voidable contracts, were designed to frighten me back into submission. And for a moment, they did. I walked the length of the apartment, hands trembling, my heart thudding like it used to before the first bell of every school day when I faced 30 restless teenagers. But then I remembered, I had survived more than this. I had buried a husband. I had raised a child alone. I had worked double shifts to keep a roof overhead. This letter was not my undoing. It was a test. The next morning, I met with Attorney Delgado again. Her office was on the second floor of a modest building with ivy climbing its walls. She greeted me with a steady gaze and placed the letter between us on the table. They're playing a familiar game, she said. When children can no longer control their parents with guilt, they try with fear. But you, Gloria, are lucid and deliberate. I've reviewed every document you signed. There's nothing they can challenge successfully. What about this claim of mental unfitness? I asked, my voice tight. We'll neutralize it. I've already contacted the US consulate here. You'll undergo medical and psychological evaluations that confirm your competency. Once we have those, their case collapses. And if they press further, we can counter with a defamation claim. Remember, you are not the defendant in this story. You are the plaintiff of your own life. Her words steadied me. For decades, I had played defense, defending my choices, my parenting, my worth. Now I was learning offense. 2 days later, I sat in a bright office at the consulate. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, asked about my history, my current health, my reasons for moving. He gave me memory tests, problem-solving puzzles, even asked me to explain my financial decisions. When I spoke of my teaching years, my retirement savings, my investments, my voice was clear. When I explained why I had blocked my daughter's number, the words carried no hesitation. "Mrs. Thompson," he said after the exam, "you are more than competent. You are resolute." The psychological evaluation was much the same. A woman with a notebook asked about grief, guilt, and identity. "Do you ever feel lost?" she asked. "I felt lost for 43 years, I replied. "Now I am found." When the official reports came in, stamped and sealed, Attorney Delgado smiled. "We'll forward these to their counsel. It won't stop them from blustering, but it strips their case of merit. And meanwhile, you continue living." Living. That word had become my compass. That weekend, I joined Louisa and several women from the support group for a day trip to Montserrat. We rode a train into the mountains, the jagged peaks rising like watchmen around us. The air was crisp, the sky vast. We hiked a trail that wound past chapels carved into stone. My legs ached, but each step felt like prayer. At the summit, we stood together overlooking valleys and distant villages. "When I left home," Louisa said softly, "I thought I would die from guilt. Now I know I was being reborn." The others nodded. I whispered to the wind, "Reborn." On the train back, a German woman named Ingrid leaned toward me. "Your story, your daughter's words, haunt me. Would you share them at our next meeting? We invite speakers sometimes. I think the group needs to hear you." My first instinct was to shrink. Public speaking had once been natural in classrooms, but this was different. This was my soul exposed. Still, I nodded. "Yes, I'll share." That night, back in my apartment, I practiced aloud. I described the cake, the necklace, the sentence that cracked me open. My voice wavered, but it did not break. Each retelling was a stitch pulling me together. Days passed. Messages from Lauren shifted tone again. Evelyn forwarded them discreetly. "Mom, please, the twins miss you. The bank is threatening foreclosure. You can't really let this happen." I didn't mean what I said. I was stressed. "We can fix this if you just come home." But none of them said the one thing I needed: "I'm sorry." At our next support group, I stood before 12 women and told my story from beginning to end. I described the decades of sacrifice, the moment of cruelty, the flight across the ocean. When I finished, the room was silent except for the sound of someone weeping quietly. Then applause, soft at first, then insistent. "You gave me words I didn't know I needed," one woman said. "I thought I was alone." I walked home that evening lighter. For years my voice had been dismissed as nagging or outdated. Now it was received as truth. The next morning, Voices After 50 emailed again. My interview had gone viral, they said, hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments. They asked if I would consider writing a regular column on reclaiming life after 60. I sat at my small table, the pearl necklace glinting in its box on the dresser, and laughed softly. All my life I had written lesson plans, graded papers, scribbled in the margins of other people's growth. Now people wanted my words for their own survival. I said yes. Weeks passed. My routine filled with small joys: Catalan classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, watercolor painting on Fridays, long walks on Sundays. I found myself humming again while I cooked. I discovered I loved painting rooftops and alleyways, my brush translating light into color. I joined a book club where we debated Baldwin and Toni Morrison late into the evening. Meanwhile, Lauren's legal threats fizzled. The evaluations silenced her claims of incompetence. The bank's letters confirmed her missed payments. And when her attorney tried one more time to intimidate, Delgado responded with a draft of a defamation suit. After that, silence. Until one evening my phone, kept mostly off, buzzed with a new email. It was from Marcus. "Gloria, I know I don't have the right to ask anything, but the twins keep asking about you. Lauren told them you're sick. They don't understand. They draw pictures of you and ask if they can mail them. I'm not asking for money, just, maybe write them? They love you." I read the message 3 times, my throat tight. For months, I had armored myself against manipulation. But the thought of my grandsons, innocent, confused, broke something open. That night, I sat with paper and pen and wrote them a letter. I told them I loved them, that I was safe, that one day when they were older they would understand why I had to step away. I didn't speak of their mother's cruelty. I spoke of hope, of how love sometimes means making choices that seem strange but keep us alive. I included a pressed flower from the plaza below my balcony. I mailed it the next morning. It was not a surrender. It was a seed. A week later, their reply arrived, a letter in shaky handwriting with crayon drawings of me standing under a Barcelona sun. They wrote, "We love you, Grandma. We're proud of you. Please don't be sad." Tears stained the page. Not of grief, but of confirmation. My absence was not erasure. It was lesson. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, "They tried to strip me of competence. They failed. They tried to call me selfish. They failed. I am still here. I am louder than ever." And as church bells rang out over Barcelona, I knew, the battle wasn't just survival anymore. It was legacy. By the time summer settled over Barcelona, with the air shimmering above the cobblestones and the smell of grilled sardines drifting from beach cafes, my days had taken on a rhythm I had never known in Miami. Mornings belonged to writing. Afternoons to discovery. Evenings to friendship. The column for Voices After 50 had become more than a project. It was a lifeline. Each week I explored a theme: the price of silence, the myth of selfishness, the power of beginning again. Comments flooded in from women across the globe. A retired nurse in South Africa who had raised her sister's children while her own dreams withered. A librarian in Canada whose grown son borrowed thousands and never repaid her, yet mocked her for asking. Their words formed a chorus. I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not. One morning, Clara, the young producer who had recorded my first interview, called me. Her voice brimmed with excitement. "Gloria, have you ever considered writing a book?" I laughed. "Child, I've spent half my life writing. Lesson plans, lectures, recommendation letters. But a book?" "Yes," she insisted. "Not just essays. Your story. And not only yours, but the wisdom you're gathering from women everywhere. Do you realize how many lives you could touch?" Her suggestion planted a seed. That evening, as the bells of Santa Maria del Mar rang through the air, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote on the first page, working title, "When Love Hurts, Reclaiming Life After Family Betrayal." The words came faster than I expected. I wrote about the birthday that ended everything, about the years of sacrifices, about that airplane seat where, for the first time in decades, I breathed without someone tugging at me. But I also wrote about the laughter in Luis's group, the thrill of learning Catalan phrases, the peace of sipping wine on my balcony. The book wasn't only about loss. It was about resurrection. Every few weeks, Evelyn called from Miami. Her voice carried a mixture of admiration and worry. "Lauren's in trouble," she reported one evening. "The house is teetering. Marcus is scrambling with some half-baked investment plan again. She's furious with you but also desperate. She even came to church last Sunday crying, saying you'd abandoned her." Abandoned? I echoed, tasting the bitterness of the word. I gave her everything for 4 decades. Choosing myself at last isn't abandonment. It's survival. Evelyn sighed. I know, but she can't see it. Not yet. I thanked her for the update, hung up, and sat in silence. The old reflex to rush in, to fix, to save, it flared inside me. But I closed my eyes, pressed my palms together, and whispered, not anymore. That weekend, Luisa and I visited a village along the Costa Brava. We walked narrow alleys lined with whitewashed houses and blue shutters. At a seaside cafe, she listened as I described the book idea. You must write it, she urged. You must. It will free not only you but women who think their only purpose is to bleed for children who call it love. Her conviction fortified mine. Back in the city, I began to draft chapters. Each one carried both my story and reflections for readers. Practical steps. Keep records of what you give, learn to say no without apology, understand the difference between help and enabling. Writing was catharsis, but also weapon. I wanted no woman to reach 70 and realize too late she had erased herself. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to email. His messages were polite, almost contrite. The twins ask about you constantly. They made honor roll this semester. They wish you could have been at the ceremony. Please, even a video call? Part of me softened. But I knew better than to blur boundaries too quickly. I replied once careful, tell them I am proud of them. I love them deeply. When they're older, they will understand. For now, letters will be best. He answered with gratitude. Unlike Lauren's messages, his words held no venom. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps recognition. Then, one humid July afternoon, as I sat editing Chapter 3, an email from a New York publishing house arrived. Clara had secretly forwarded them my columns. The subject line read, Book Proposal Invitation. I pressed a hand to my chest. They wanted me to send an outline and sample chapters. My knees trembled as I rose from the chair. At 65, after years of being told my wisdom was nagging, my words had become valuable. That evening, I celebrated by walking down to Barceloneta Beach. The sand was warm, the sea restless. I carried a small notebook and scribbled lines as gulls wheeled above. For decades, I was cast as background. Now I step onto the stage of my own life, unashamed of the spotlight. Meanwhile, in Miami, Lauren's unraveling grew worse. Evelyn told me she had stormed into the bank, demanding they ignore my claim as cosigner. The manager refused. Then she tried to take out a loan against the clinic equipment, denied. Finally, she called Evelyn, sobbing, she destroyed me. My own mother destroyed me. When Evelyn relayed those words, I felt no triumph. Only sadness. Lauren still saw me not as a woman, but as a reservoir she was entitled to. Without that, she called it destruction. By August, I had sent the publisher a full proposal. Their response was swift. They offered me a contract. I stared at the screen, disbelief flooding me. Me, a retired teacher, a grandmother, a woman once dismissed as burdensome, was now an author. I called Evelyn. I'm writing a book, I said, my voice trembling with joy. She laughed, then cried. Gloria, you're finally telling your story. The world needs it. I spent long days at my desk, the city sounds drifting in, scooters buzzing, church bells, laughter from cafes. Each chapter one completed felt like pulling a shard from my heart and turning it into something shining. One evening, as cicadas hummed in the heat, I received a package. Inside was a letter in young handwriting, plus a folded drawing. The twins again. They had drawn me standing in front of a castle with flowers around my feet. The letter read, Grandma, Mom says you're mad, but we think you're strong. We hope you're happy. Love, Ethan and Miles. Tears slid down my cheeks. I pinned the drawing above my desk. It became my compass, proof that love survives even when bridges burn. As summer waned, the group invited me to speak at a public event in a civic hall, an evening titled Second Chances After 60. I stood at the podium before 100 faces, many lined with the same years as mine, and told my story. When I spoke of the birthday cake that went uneaten, a murmur rippled through the room. When I spoke of the flight to Barcelona, a cheer rose. Afterward, a woman in her 70s grasped my hands. "You gave me courage. Tonight, I will tell my son no." Walking home through the lamplit streets, I felt a strength I hadn't known existed in me. I was no longer just surviving. I was sowing seeds. That night in my journal, I wrote, "Lauren thought she wished me dead. What she killed was the mother who lived only for her. What rose instead is the woman who lives for herself, and for every daughter who must learn that love does not mean sacrifice unto ashes." The book grew, chapter by chapter. And so did I. By early autumn, Barcelona's light had softened. The heat retreated, replaced by breezes carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. My manuscript neared completion, and with each page, I felt as though I were stitching together not only my own torn self but the voices of countless women silenced for too long. The publisher in New York sent editorial notes, gentle but precise. Expand this section on financial exploitation. Include more about how you rebuilt your independence. I spent mornings at my desk in the Gothic Quarter, the twins drawing pinned above me, writing with a fervor I hadn't known since my teaching days. One Saturday, after mailing a revised draft, I wandered to the Parc de la Ciutadella. Children played around the great fountain, couples lounged on blankets, musicians strummed guitars. Sitting beneath a plane tree, I realized I was smiling without forcing it. For decades, I had waited for Lauren's approval, for her gratitude. Now I was learning the radical act of approving myself. That evening, Evelyn called. Her voice was hushed, as if she were shielding the phone. "Gloria, the bank has made it official. They've filed foreclosure papers. Lauren's furious. She says you betrayed her." I closed my eyes. I didn't betray her. I stopped betraying myself. Evelyn sighed. "I know. But she's unraveling." The twins told their teacher that Mom cries every night. The words pierced me. Guilt crept in like a shadow. But I held fast. I reminded myself, grief is the price of consequence, not of cruelty. 2 weeks later, When Love Hurts, the title chosen with the publisher, was officially announced. The press release described it as a memoir and guidebook for women reclaiming their lives after family betrayal. Overnight, my inbox overflowed. Women wrote from London, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, Manila. Each story was a variation of mine. Children who used them as wallets, partners who drained them dry, relatives who silenced their pain. "Your words gave me permission to dream again," one wrote. Another, "I hid your column from my daughter because she would call me selfish. But secretly, I've been saving for my own apartment." The weight of those confessions pressed on me, not as burden but as responsibility. My life, once dismissed as ordinary, had become testament. Meanwhile, in Miami, Lauren's world crumbled. Evelyn kept me informed. She sold the clinic equipment at a loss, she reported. Marcus took a low-paying job at a car rental company. They moved into a cramped apartment downtown. Lauren complains it smells of mildew. I pictured her, accustomed to marble countertops and infinity pools, now folding laundry in a space half the size. Part of me ached. Another part whispered, "This is how life teaches lessons pride refuses to hear." Around this time, Marcus emailed again. "Gloria, I won't lie. We're struggling. But I want you to know I admire what you've done. I see now how much we leaned on you, and how unfair it was. The twins ask if they can visit you one day. I tell them maybe, when they're older. They've started saving coins in a jar for Spain money." The image of 2 boys dropping pennies into a jar nearly undid me. I wrote back, "Tell them their grandmother loves them, and that Spain will always welcome them when the time is right." The book's release approached quickly. The publisher arranged a virtual launch, streamed globally. Clara came to my apartment with lights and cameras, transforming my small living room into a studio. When I spoke, my voice trembled but held. "I wrote this book," I said, "because one woman's silence is many women's prison. If my daughter's cruelty was the spark, this book is the fire I built from its ashes. Tens of thousands tuned in. Messages flooded the chat. Thank you for saying what we could not. Your courage is ours now. The following week, news outlets picked it up. A Spanish newspaper ran a headline, American teacher at 65 reinvents life in Barcelona. My photo appeared beside it, silver curls, eyes steady, smile faint but real. Soon invitations arrived, radio interviews, podcasts, even a morning show in New York. I accepted selectively, careful not to let new demands mimic the old chains. But each time I spoke, I thought of the women listening in kitchens, buses, offices, whispering, maybe I can too. Lauren, predictably, reacted. Evelyn forwarded me a message Lauren had posted online. My mother is exploiting family pain for fame. She abandoned her grandchildren. Don't believe her lies. I stared at the words on the screen. For a heartbeat, anger surged. But then calm followed. Her bitterness was proof of the wound. And wounds, if ignored, fester. Mine had been cut open by her cruelty, but I had chosen to clean it with truth. She still let hers rot. Meanwhile, letters from the twins arrived more often. In shaky handwriting, they told me about soccer games, school projects, and a stray kitten they wanted to adopt. I replied faithfully, sending postcards with sketches of Barcelona landmarks. Each time I dropped one into the mailbox, I whispered, "This is my legacy, truth and love, not silence and sacrifice." As autumn deepened, my life blossomed further. The watercolor class mounted a small exhibition, and 2 of my paintings sold. The book club invited me to moderate a session on Toni Morrison. My Catalan teacher praised my progress. "Parles ambcor," she said, "you speak with heart." Then one crisp October morning, as I walked past a bakery, I saw a line of women clutching copies of my book. They were waiting for me at a signing organized by the local bookstore. When I arrived, applause erupted. Women hugged me, whispered their secrets. I left my abusive son last week. I finally told my daughter no. I signed each book with care, writing not just my name but messages like "You are not alone and your life is still yours." That night, as I sat on my balcony sipping tea, I realized something profound. Lauren's rejection, her words of death, had birthed my second life. Without her cruelty, I might never have escaped the cycle of sacrifice. Pain had been my midwife. Meanwhile, Evelyn called again. "Gloria, she's broken," she said quietly. She came to me yesterday, pale, thinner, hair undone. She said, "Mom doesn't love me anymore." Tears pricked my eyes. "I love her," I whispered. "But I will not enable her." Evelyn's voice softened. "Perhaps one day she'll see the difference." I didn't answer. Instead, I gazed at the Mediterranean, moonlight shimmering on its waves. Some truths are too sharp for hope. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, "I am no longer waiting for my daughter to apologize. I am living my apology to myself, for every year I vanished." The book is not revenge. It is resurrection. And with that, I closed the journal, lay down in clean sheets, and slept without dreams. By winter, Barcelona had draped itself in gold light and long shadows. Tourists slowed, the streets were quieter, and I often walked along the waterfront wrapped in my wool coat, listening to the sea crash against the rocks. My book, When Love Hurts, was no longer just mine. It had become something alive, moving across oceans, carried by strangers who saw themselves in my story. The publisher sent me weekly updates. "You're in the top 10 of the nonfiction charts in the US and the UK, one email read. "Spain, France, and Brazil are picking up momentum. We're negotiating translations in German and Japanese." I stared at the words, stunned. For years, my voice had been dismissed as nagging, outdated, unnecessary. Now it was traveling farther than I ever had, a beacon for women who had been silenced. Letters poured in through the publisher. One from a woman in Nairobi, "Your book reached me like water in a desert. I left my grown son's house yesterday. I finally feel alive." Another from Argentina, I read your story aloud to my sisters. We all cried, then we made a pact never to use our mother like we once did. Each letter was both balm and burden. Their gratitude filled me with warmth, but the scale of the suffering was staggering. So many mothers erased, so many voices drowned. I wrote back when I could, my words small stitches on their wounds. Meanwhile, in Miami, Lauren's collapse accelerated. Evelyn kept me informed through hushed phone calls. The foreclosure is final, she reported. The house is gone. They've moved into a modest 2-bedroom in Little Havana. Marcus works long shifts at the car rental counter. Lauren, she's bitter. She blames everyone but herself. I sat at my desk, listening in silence. Part of me ached for her, the girl I once held in my arms, whose asthmatic lungs wheezed through nights while I stayed awake counting her breaths. But the woman she had become. She had hardened against gratitude. Evelyn added softly, she keeps saying you destroyed her life. No, I whispered. I only stopped destroying mine. The twins, however, were thriving in their small ways. Their letters came more often, filled with childlike resilience. We joined the school soccer team. We lost our first game but scored 1 goal. We're still saving coins for Spain. Their hope shone like a lantern in the dark. By January, invitations flooded in. Conferences, women's groups, universities. My publisher urged me to choose wisely. I accepted a keynote in London for International Women's Day. The event was held in a grand hall, chandeliers glimmering above rows of women in every shade of life. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers. When I took the stage, applause thundered. I spoke of the quiet prison of sacrifice, of the birthday that shattered illusion, of the flight to Barcelona that birthed freedom. My voice was steady, my heart fierce. Afterward, a woman with silver hair clutched my hands. I thought I was too old to begin again, she said, tears in her eyes. Tonight, you gave me permission. Those moments nourished me more than any royalty check. Still, the financial independence was undeniable. The book sold beyond projections. For the first time in my life, I had more than enough. I moved into a sunlit apartment overlooking the sea, with a balcony wide enough for pots of geraniums. Each morning I stood there, coffee in hand, marveling at the fact that the money I once funneled into Lauren's endless demands was now funding my own joy. And yet, Lauren could not let go. One evening, Evelyn called, her voice heavy. She read your book, Gloria. My chest tightened. And she slammed it shut halfway through, said it was all lies. But later, I found her sitting alone, holding the book, tears on her face. She's cracking, Gloria. She doesn't know how to face what she did. I set the phone down after the call and stared at the city lights beyond my balcony. For years, I had longed for those tears, for recognition. Now, they no longer felt like my salvation. They were hers to wrestle with, not mine to claim. A week later, a letter arrived, not from the twins this time, but from Lauren herself. The handwriting was hurried, uneven. Mom, I don't know why I'm writing. Maybe because everyone else has given up listening. Maybe because the walls are closing in. I read your book. I hate it, but I can't stop thinking about it. You made me sound like a monster. Maybe I am. But you also made me remember things I'd buried. You working nights for my medicine. You selling your jewelry for my school trip. You crying at my weddings. I don't know how to face what I did to you. I don't know how to undo it. If you never write me back, I'll understand. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. For the first time, she hadn't asked for money. She hadn't accused. She hadn't demanded. She had confessed. I didn't write back. Not yet. Some wounds needed more time. But I placed the letter in a drawer, not the trash. That was, perhaps, my quiet reply. Meanwhile, the world kept opening. I spoke in Paris, then in Lisbon. Women came with daughters, holding my book like a shield. After each event, I returned to Barcelona, grounding myself in the rhythm of ordinary life. painting rooftops, learning new Catalan verbs, sipping wine with Luisa in corner cafes. At a book club one evening, someone asked, "Gloria, do you ever regret leaving your old life behind?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "I don't regret leaving. I regret not leaving sooner." The room fell silent, then someone whispered, "Amen." By spring, my book had sold 500,000 copies across continents. Reporters called me a voice for silenced mothers. I smiled at the phrase. But in truth, I was simply a woman who finally listened to her own silence and chose to break it. Lauren's letters continued sporadically. Some angry, some aching, some confused. I read them, then set them aside. Healing was not a single bridge. It was a long road with many stumbles. Whether she walked it or not was no longer mine to control. One evening, as I watched the sun sink into the Mediterranean, I whispered to the waves. She asked me to disappear. I did. But what disappeared was her illusion of me as endless. What remains is the woman who refuses to vanish again. And with that, I closed the balcony doors, brewed myself a pot of tea, and returned to my desk to begin my second book. Because my story was not ending. It was only widening. The Mediterranean shimmered beneath my balcony as spring stretched into summer. By then, when Love Hurts had become more than a book, it was a movement. Reading groups popped up in cities I'd never seen, from Johannesburg to Melbourne. Women sent photos of themselves holding the book in small kitchens, on commuter trains, at hospital bedsides. They wrote on social media, "This saved me. This gave me language. This reminded me I'm allowed to choose myself." The publisher urged me to strike while the iron was hot. "What about a follow-up?" they asked. "Not just memoir, something practical. A guidebook. A manifesto." At first, the thought overwhelmed me. Hadn't I already poured out my soul? But when I looked at the letters piling on my desk, I realized the women weren't only asking for my story. They were asking for tools, steps to climb out of their own prisons. So I began again. This time, I wrote not only of my journey but of strategies. How to set financial boundaries without shame, how to recognize emotional manipulation, how to disentangle love from sacrifice. The working title came to me one evening as the bells of Santa Maria del Mar rang in the distance. Enough. The power of a woman's no. I wrote every morning, the sea breeze lifting my curtains. My desk bore simple companions, the twins' drawing of me in front of a castle, Maya Angelou's poems, and my mother's pearl necklace, still unworn, still waiting for the day it would feel right to pass it on. Meanwhile, news from Miami grew darker. Evelyn's calls carried the tone of lament. "Marcus quit his job," she said one evening. "He says he can't stand the humiliation of customers barking orders. Lauren has taken work at a spa, but it doesn't pay enough. They argue all the time. The twins. They hide in their room." My heart clenched, but I remained still. "They must walk their road," I replied softly. Lauren's letters grew erratic. Sometimes furious, sometimes pleading. "You made me into a villain in front of the whole world," one read. Another, "Mom, I don't know how to live without you telling me what to do." And then, "Please, can you just send something to help with rent this month? Just this once." That old tug, the reflex to rescue, rose in me like an echo. But I closed my eyes and whispered the mantra that had become my anchor. Love is not rescue. Love is truth. I didn't send money. I sent silence. And yet, the twins' letters never ceased. They wrote about school projects, soccer tournaments, the stray kitten that had now become theirs. They sent pictures, stick figures of themselves holding my hands. I wrote back faithfully, each letter carrying both love and boundaries. "I am proud of you. I love you. And one day, when you are older, you will understand the choices I made." By midsummer, the second book draft was complete. My editor in New York called it urgent, fierce, necessary. The publisher announced a fall release with simultaneous launches in English, Spanish, and German. The advance alone was more money than I had ever seen in my teaching career. For the first time in my life, Financial security wasn't tethered to anyone else's choices. It was mine, wholly mine. The launch tour began in Madrid. I stood before hundreds of women, some with daughters by their sides, and spoke of the power of no. Applause thundered through the hall. In Paris, women lined up around the block for signings. In Berlin, a woman whispered through tears, "Your book gave me the courage to leave my abusive son. I am free now." Each event reminded me, this was not about fame. It was about liberation. Back in Miami, the contrast sharpened. Evelyn wrote me one long letter that felt more like a confession. "Gloria, your daughter is unraveling. She tells anyone who will listen that you destroyed her. But beneath the rage, I see something else: shame. The world has read your story, and she can't escape the truth. People whisper. Marcus resents her. The boys adore you even from afar. And she doesn't know how to live without the mother she once consumed. I pray she finds her own rebirth. But for now, she is a woman drowning in the tide she created." I read Evelyn's letter on the balcony, the waves breaking far below. My chest ached, but I didn't crumble. I folded the letter and placed it beside Lauren's first handwritten note, the one where she admitted she didn't know how to undo what she had done. I kept both as evidence, not of guilt, but of reality. By autumn, enough. The power of a woman's no was released. Reviews called it a manifesto for mothers everywhere, a handbook for liberation, a necessary addition to feminist literature. Sales surpassed the first book within weeks. Invitations poured in from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa. I accepted sparingly, careful to guard my peace. One night, after returning from Lisbon, I found a new letter waiting in my mailbox. The handwriting was different, older, steadier. "Grandma, we are saving for Spain. We have $142 in our jar. We read about your new book online. We're proud of you. Mom doesn't like when we talk about you, but we do anyway. We know you love us. We love you too. One day we'll come find you. Love, Ethan and Miles." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling. They weren't asking for money. They weren't asking me to fix anything. They were offering love, plain and unadorned. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Legacy is not the house I lost, the money I gave, the sacrifices unseen. Legacy is 2 boys saving coins to cross an ocean and find the grandmother who chose truth." And as I closed the notebook, I knew, Lauren's cruelty had birthed not only my freedom, but a ripple touching countless others. Her attempt to kill me had instead resurrected me. The woman who once arrived in Barcelona with trembling hands and a broken heart was gone. In her place stood an author, a teacher to the world, a grandmother waiting with open arms. And I promised myself this: never again would I vanish for anyone. By the time autumn surrendered to the quiet chill of winter, Barcelona felt less like a place I had moved to and more like the soil in which my new self had taken root. The rhythm of the city, the echo of cathedral bells, the chatter of children in the plazas, the faint smell of bread baking at dawn, had woven itself into my bones. I was no longer the woman who arrived here trembling with grief. I was Gloria Simmons, author, teacher, grandmother, and woman reborn. But while my days brimmed with purpose, the shadow of Lauren's absence never fully disappeared. She hadn't written in months. Not since the angry letters begging for money had been met with silence. Not since the twins' quiet promises to save for Spain. Then, one December morning, a message came, not from Lauren, but from Marcus. "Gloria," it read, "Lauren is not well. She refuses to admit it, but she's slipping into something dark. She blames you for everything. Our finances, her reputation, even her reflection in the mirror. I don't know how much longer I can keep the boys shielded from her storms. I'm not asking for money. I just thought you should know." I read the words 3 times. My first instinct was panic, the mother inside me stirring with old reflexes. Rush in, fix, rescue. But I closed my eyes and breathed. I was no longer the Gloria who believed saving Lauren was the same as loving her. I folded the letter and tucked it away. That evening, I joined a winter gathering of my new friends, Luisa, the Italian grandmother, Rosa, a retired Catalan librarian, and May, a Chinese painter who had moved to Spain at 60. We gathered around a long wooden table in Rosa's apartment, bowls of soup steaming, laughter spilling like wine. When I shared Marcus's letter, the room grew solemn. "You cannot go back into her storm," Rosa said firmly. "You are not her savior. You are her mother, yes, but mothers are women too, and women deserve peace." Luisa touched my hand. "My daughter once sent me letters like that. I thought she would never soften. But after years of silence, she came with humility. True humility. You'll know if Lauren ever reaches that place. Until then, you guard your freedom." Their words settled deep inside me. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for keeping my distance. I felt strong. Still, the twins remained my tether. Their letters arrived faithfully, filled with the innocence that no storm could taint. "Grandma, we're up to $198 in our Spain jar," Ethan wrote. "We saw your picture on the internet. You looked so fancy in Paris. We showed it to our teacher. He said he's proud of you too." I answered with joy, "I am saving a jar too, full of hugs and stories, for when you arrive." When the new year came, I received another kind of letter. This one was from a university in London inviting me to teach a short seminar series on narratives of liberation in later life. I smiled as I read it. Me, Gloria Simmons, once just a tired math teacher from Chicago, now being asked to lecture on freedom to scholars across Europe. The seminar was a triumph. Students half my age scribbled notes as I spoke of the dangerous myth of the selfless mother, the silent toll of invisible labor, the bravery of saying no after decades of yes. One young woman approached afterward with tears in her eyes. "My mother has always given everything to us," she said. "I never realized how heavy that must feel. Tonight I'm going to call her, not to ask for anything but to thank her." Her words followed me back to Barcelona like a candle flame. Perhaps this was the true measure of my story. Not whether Lauren ever understood, but whether strangers across the world could. And yet, in the quiet of night, Lauren's absence still whispered. Had she truly sunk as low as Marcus claimed? Would she ever rise? The answer came in a most unexpected form. One crisp March morning, as the almond trees bloomed pink across the city, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized instantly. Lauren's. But the tone was different. No anger, no blame. Just raw, broken honesty. "Mom," it began. "I've been seeing a counselor. She asked me to write a letter I never have to send. But I'm sending it anyway. You were right about me. About the way I used you. I hated hearing it, but I see it now. I'm drowning, Mom. And the truth is, I don't even know who I am without you to fight against. I'm sorry. I don't deserve forgiveness. But if the boys ever reach you, please tell them their mother tried." I set the letter down, my hands trembling. For the first time, Lauren had spoken not with cruelty, but with vulnerability. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was a crack in the wall. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked through the Gothic quarter until my feet carried me to the cathedral. I lit a candle, not for Lauren's redemption, that was hers to claim, but for her survival. For her boys. For peace to find her someday. When I returned home, I wrote her a short reply. "Lauren, I hear your words. Healing is your work, not mine. But know this, I love you. I always will. That love no longer comes in the form of rescue or sacrifice. It is simply there, steady as the tide. Take care of yourself. For your sake, and for your sons. Mom." I mailed it the next morning and felt no fear, no shame, only release. The following weeks brought more letters, still tentative, still halting, but softer than before. She spoke of counseling, of applying for part-time work, of learning to cook simple meals instead of ordering takeout. She admitted how hard it was. She admitted how far she had to go. I didn't cheerlead or scold. I simply bore witness, sending back brief replies of encouragement without falling back into old patterns. The twins' letters continued to arrive, brighter than ever. By summer, their jar had reached $312. Grandma, we're coming, even if it takes years. I pinned that letter to my wall above my desk, where I could see it each morning as I wrote. Because whether or not Lauren ever fully healed, the twins were proof of what endured: love, resilience, hope. And in the quiet of my Barcelona apartment, with the sea stretching wide before me, I knew part 2 of my life was not about saving anyone else. It was about standing ready, with arms open, whenever true love, stripped of manipulation, heavy with honesty, finally arrived. The day I had long carried like a fragile hope finally arrived, not with fanfare, not with planning, but with the quiet insistence of life unfolding. It was a breezy Saturday morning in Barcelona. The air smelled of sea salt and jasmine, and I was setting the table on my balcony with fresh bread, fruit, and coffee. The post arrived in a neat stack, and there, amid bills and book contracts, was a letter bearing the handwriting of boys becoming young men. Grandma, it read. We did it. Our Spain jar is full. Dad helped us too. We have tickets for June. We're coming to see you. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the page. Tears blurred the words, but the meaning was undeniable. Ethan and Miles, now 13, were coming. The boys who had once sent me stick figures of us holding hands were no longer children. They were travelers crossing an ocean to find their grandmother. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." For weeks, I prepared. I scrubbed my apartment from top to bottom, as if cleanliness could express love. I bought new sheets, soft as clouds, for the pull-out sofa. I stocked the pantry with cocoa and cereal, and filled the fridge with fruit. I walked to every corner of my neighborhood, noting which cafes might delight them, which plazas had musicians they would remember forever. But I also prepared my heart. I stood at the mirror and spoke aloud, "You are their grandmother, not their savior. You will give them love, not money. You will give them presents, not sacrifice." I repeated those words until they were stitched into me. June came, and with it, the summer heat. On the morning of their arrival, I dressed in my best linen dress, white and cool, with a scarf the color of the sea. My hands shook as I hailed a taxi to El Prat Airport. The arrivals hall buzzed with travelers, suitcases clattering across the floor, voices echoing in a dozen languages. I scanned the crowd, heart pounding, and then, I saw them. 2 tall boys, shoulders broader than I remembered, faces longer, but smiles so achingly familiar I nearly collapsed. "Grandma!" They shouted in unison. I opened my arms, and they barreled into me, their teenage bodies awkward but warm. I kissed their cheeks again and again, my tears wetting their skin. "My boys," I whispered. "My brave, brave boys." Marcus trailed behind them, thinner than before, his eyes weary but kind. He gave me a hesitant smile. "They wouldn't stop until I made this happen," he said softly. "Thank you," I replied. And though we both carried unspoken history, at that moment, gratitude outweighed resentment. We rode back to the city together. The twins pressed their faces to the taxi window, marveling at palm trees, at the blue sweep of the Mediterranean. "Grandma, it looks like a painting." Miles exclaimed. "Wait until you taste the churros," I said, laughing through tears. At home, they dropped their bags and rushed to the balcony. "This is where you live?" Ethan asked, eyes wide. "This is where I live," I answered. "And for as long as you're here, it's where you live too." That night, I made dinner, paella with shrimp and saffron, the way a neighbor had taught me. We ate on the balcony, candles flickering in the warm air. The boys told stories about school, about friends, about soccer games won and lost. I listened greedily, soaking in every detail. Later, when they had gone to bed, Marcus lingered on the balcony with me. "They're good boys," he said quietly. "Better than I deserve." "You've done your best," I replied. He shook his head. "Lauren. She's still struggling. Some days she's herself, some days she's angry, lost. I try to shield the boys, but they see more than they should." I said nothing. My heart hurt for her, but I would not fall into the trap of fixing. Marcus exhaled. I wanted you to know, I'm proud of them for reaching you. They need this. They need you. The following days were a blur of wonder. I showed Ethan and Miles the Gothic Quarter, its narrow streets alive with history. We climbed Montjuic Hill, the boys racing ahead, laughing, their sneakers slapping the stone. We visited the Sagrada Familia, where they stood open-mouthed beneath the soaring ceilings. Grandma, it feels like being inside a forest made of light, Ethan whispered. We ate gelato by the beach, our feet buried in the sand. We rode bicycles down the promenade. At night, we sprawled on the pull-out sofa, watching movies dubbed into Spanish, the boys giggling at the mismatched voices. One afternoon, while Marcus attended a business call, Miles turned to me suddenly. Grandma, why did you really leave? The question froze me. I mean, he continued, eyes searching mine, Mom says you left because you didn't love us. But I don't believe that. I cupped his face gently. Oh, sweetheart. I left because I had to learn how to love myself. And because sometimes, the best way to show love is to stop letting someone hurt you. Ethan leaned in, frowning. You mean Mom? Yes, I said, my voice steady. I love your mother. I always will. But she was hurting me, and I couldn't survive if I stayed. That doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Never, not for a second. Their eyes brimmed with tears, but their hands reached for mine. And in that moment, I felt a bond deeper than blood, a bond forged in truth. On their last night, we gathered again on the balcony, the city lights glittering like jewels below us. Marcus raised a glass of wine, the boys clinking glasses of juice. To new beginnings, he said. To family, I added. And though the ache of goodbye loomed, I knew something permanent had been planted. The twins had found me, not as a bank, not as a shadow, but as their grandmother, whole and unbroken. As they packed their bags the next morning, Miles slipped a note into my hand. Grandma, now that we know the way, we'll always come back. Spain Jar, Round 2. When I watched them disappear into the security line at the airport, my heart didn't shatter. It swelled. Because this time, the leaving wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a bridge no storm could ever wash away. Years passed like chapters in a well-worn book, each page carrying me further from the shadows of that fateful birthday and closer to the fullness of a life reclaimed. Barcelona, once the stage of my rebirth, became the heartbeat of my existence. I grew older, 70, 72, 75, but instead of shrinking, my world expanded. The twins kept their promise. Every summer, they arrived, taller each year, their voices deepening, their questions more complex. By 15, they spoke with a wisdom that startled me. By 17, they were young men, walking beside me down Los Romblos as equals, not children tugging at my hands. Grandma, Ethan said one evening as we shared tapas in a crowded bodega, you changed everything. If you hadn't left, we wouldn't know what courage looked like. Miles nodded. Mom doesn't understand yet. But we do. Their words were a balm, proof that love endures even when twisted by circumstance. And though Lauren's absence still lingered, it no longer haunted me. Our correspondence remained sporadic. Letters filled with apologies, promises, faltering admissions of therapy and effort. Sometimes months passed without word. I responded only when her words carried sincerity, never when they dripped with blame or demand. I had learned the difference. The books continued to ripple across the world. When love hurts and enough, the power of a woman's no became staples in women's studies courses, book clubs, even church groups. Letters poured in from women of every age, culture, and class. They told me of boundaries drawn, toxic cycles broken, new lives begun. I began speaking less at universities and more at community centers, prisons, shelters. Places where women most needed the reminder that their dignity was non-negotiable. My body slowed with age, but my spirit burned brighter. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled through the Gothic Quarter, a letter arrived from Chicago. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lauren's. Mom, it read. I am 50 now. Can you believe it? I wasted so much of my life resenting you, blaming you, pretending my failures were your fault. But the truth has sat heavy on me, year after year, until I couldn't run from it anymore. You loved me more fiercely than anyone ever has. And I used that love like a weapon against you. I don't ask you to forget. I only ask this: when I leave this earth, let it not be with bitterness between us. Let the last words between mother and daughter be peace. I read the letter 3 times, my eyes wet but my hands steady. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't absolution. But it was real. I replied simply, Lauren, peace is already yours. I forgave you long ago, not for your sake but for mine. I hope you find rest in your own heart. Mom. And then, I let go of the last thread of anger I had held. By the time I turned 80, I had settled into a rhythm of gentle days. Mornings spent writing by the window, afternoons walking the seaside, evenings surrounded by friends who had become my chosen family. The twins, now young men in their 20s, visited faithfully. They brought girlfriends, then wives, then children of their own. My apartment rang with laughter again. Children chasing each other across the tiles, babies clapping to the sound of flamenco guitars in the plaza below. One summer, as the family gathered for paella on my balcony, Ethan raised his glass. To Grandma Gloria, he said, for showing us that love without respect isn't love at all. And for proving it's never too late to start over. The others clinked glasses, and I felt something wash over me, something I had waited a lifetime to feel. Not obligation. Not exhaustion. Not sacrifice. Just love, whole and uncomplicated. As the years folded into one another, my legacy took form. The royalties from my books funded scholarships for women over 50 who wanted to return to school. I worked with local organizations to create a retreat in the Spanish countryside, a sanctuary where women could recover from the wounds of family betrayal and rediscover themselves. We called it Casa Nueva Vida. At 85, I walked its gardens for the first time, listening to women laugh, cry, and tell their stories under olive trees. My eyes filled with tears. This was the culmination of everything: the pain, the loss, the breaking, the rising. Out of ashes, something living had bloomed. Lauren never made it to Spain. Her health declined in her later years, and she remained in Miami, supported by Marcus and eventually by her sons. But the bitterness in her letters softened into gratitude. On her 62nd birthday, she wrote her last letter to me. Mom, I don't have much time left, but I want to leave this world with honesty. You were right. About everything. You gave me everything you had, and I threw it back in your face. And when you finally left, I thought I'd won. But I lost the only person who ever truly stood by me. Thank you for not hating me. Thank you for loving me anyway. Please tell the boys about me with kindness. That's all I ask. I cried for her, not as the mother who once demanded my death, but as the daughter who never learned to heal. When she passed quietly a month later, I lit a candle in the cathedral and whispered, "Go in peace, my child." My final years were marked not by loss but by abundance. I lived to see great-grandchildren toddle through my apartment, their laughter echoing against the same balcony where I once sat alone, broken and betrayed. I lived to see my story taught in classrooms, my books translated into languages I could not read. I lived to see women stand tall, drawing boundaries in my name, finding courage in my scars. And one evening, as the sun dipped low over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I sat with Ethan and Miles, now men with silver at their temples. "Grandma," Miles said softly, "do you ever regret it? Leaving?" I smiled, the lines of my face deep with age, but my heart light as air. "No," I said. "Because leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And everything you see here grew from that choice. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to walk away. And when you do, you don't just save yourself, you plant the seeds for everyone who comes after." They nodded, their eyes shining with understanding. And as the sea whispered below and the city hummed around us, I closed my eyes, knowing the truth at last. I had lived not only for others, not only for duty, but for myself. And in doing so, I had given my family, my real legacy, the most precious gift of all, a life lived in freedom, love, and dignity.